was a gray Tuesday morning when Emily arrived at the funeral home, the kind of day where the sky seemed to press down on the earth. She'd been a mortician for 22 years, long enough to know the rhythm of death, its quiet demands, its unspoken rules. The prep room greeted her with its usual sterile chill, stainless steel tables gleaming under fluorescent lights, the faint hum of the ventilation system, and the sharp scent of disinfectant cutting through the stillness. She set her coffee down and reviewed the day's log. One new intake. Charles T., a 58-year-old man who died of a heart attack. His wife, Laura, wanted an open casket viewing before cremation. Routine enough. Charles arrived at 9:15 a.m., delivered by the county transport team. Emily signed the chain of custody form, checked the toe tag, and wheeled the gurney into the prep room. The autopsy report noted a standard Y incision, organs returned, no complications. She unzipped the body bag and began her inspection. His skin was pale, the incision neatly sutured, the body intact as expected. But as she pressed her gloved hands against his abdomen, something felt off. Too hollow, too light. Frowning, Emily grabbed a scalpel and carefully reopened a section of the sutures. She peered into the abdominal cavity, expecting the familiar weight of returned organs. Instead, she found emptiness where the liver should have been. No viscera bag, no remnants, just a clean, vacant space. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the breach of protocol. Missing organs happened, sometimes retained for testing, but there was always paperwork. She flipped through the file again. Nothing. No note. No indication of retention. Emily reached for the phone and dialed the medical examiner's office. After a brief hold, Dr. Harris, the on-duty pathologist, answered. Dr. Harris, it's Emily from Riverside Funeral Home. I've got Charles T. here post-autopsy and his liver's missing. There's no documentation about it being held back. Can you check? A pause. That's odd, Dr. Harris said, his voice clipped. Give me a minute. She heard papers rustling then. Our records show all organs were returned. There's no reason the liver wouldn't be there. Well, it's not, Emily replied, her tone steady but firm. Could there have been an oversight? I'll dig deeper and call you back, he promised. Sit tight. Emily hung up and stared at Charles on the table. She couldn't start embalming yet, not with a missing organ and a viewing scheduled. Laura deserved to see her husband whole, or at least as close to it as possible. Emily covered the body with a sheet and waited, the silence of the prep room wrapping around her like a shroud. Minutes ticked by, stretching into an hour. She adjusted instruments, checked the fluid levels, anything to keep her hands busy. Then it came. A sound, faint but unmistakable. A low, gurgling rasp, like liquid bubbling through a narrow tube. It emanated from the table where Charles lay. Emily's head snapped up, her breath catching. She stepped closer, the sound growing slightly louder, then fading into silence. The sheet hadn't moved, the body still as stone. She lifted a corner, peering at Charles's face. His eyes were closed, mouth set, no sign of disturbance. Yet the sound had been real, not a trick of the vents or her tired mind. She'd heard post-mortem noises before, air escaping lungs, muscles twitching as they settled. But this was different, too deliberate, too alive. Emily stepped back, her rational side wrestling with the unease creeping up her spine. She checked the room. No open windows, no equipment malfunction. Just her and Charles, alone in the cold. The phone rang, jolting her. Dr. Harris's voice came through, apologetic. Emily, we found the issue. An intern misplaced the liver during cleanup, set it aside for a secondary check and forgot to log it. It's on its way back now. Should be there by noon. Relief washed over her, tinged with irritation. Thanks, Dr. Harris. I'll handle it from here. The liver arrived later, delivered in a sealed container. Emily reintegrated it, completed the embalming, and restored Charles to a state of quiet dignity. His skin took on a soft flush, his features smoothed into peace. When Laura arrived for the viewing, she lingered by the casket, tracing her fingers along his hand. "He looks like himself," she murmured, tears brimming. Emily nodded, saying nothing of the morning's events. That evening, as she locked up, Emily paused by the prep table. The room was silent now, the air still. She thought of the gurgling sound, maybe a fluke, maybe her imagination. Dr. Harris had provided a neat explanation, a human error corrected. Yet, as she turned off the lights, a question lingered, unvoiced but heavy. What had made that noise? In 22 years, Emily had learned to respect the line between life and death, a boundary both firm and fragile. Most days it held, but some days, like this one, it blurred, just enough to remind her that not every mystery in this work had an answer. She shut the door, the click echoing in the dark, and carried the day's weight home with her. There's something sacred about the final ID viewing. It's not for the public. It's not for show. It's just the family. Quiet, raw, in that narrow space between acceptance and disbelief. My job in those moments is simple. Preserve dignity, honor the life, and make sure the details, the deeply human ones, are handled with care. This was a Tuesday morning. Rain in the forecast. I remember because I brought a towel to cover the family's windshield in case it started pouring during the service. That's the kind of detail we think about in this line of work. Things most people never notice. The deceased was a man in his mid-60s, John S. Complications from a stroke. DNR was honored. Peaceful passing in his home with hospice present. His wife of 41 years, Margaret, requested a private ID viewing before cremation. No embalming, just gentle preparation. Hair combed, mouth set, eyes closed, clean clothes, hands folded. Direct cremation after viewing. He arrived the day before, no autopsy, so the body was intact. Cooling was done promptly. I'd done the prep myself, washed, disinfected, positioned. A light dab of balm at the corners of his mouth, subtle, natural, no cosmetics. His wife didn't want him altered. I wheeled him into our ID room, a simple space, softly lit, neutral walls, calming artwork. The kind of place designed not to impress, but to feel safe. I left the room to bring Margaret in. When I returned, she was holding his hand, trembling, whispering. She asked me for a moment alone. I nodded, stepped out, gave her the time. 10 minutes passed. I always give people longer than they think they need. When I came back in, she wiped her eyes and gave a small nod. I offered to help her back to the sitting area. That's when it happened. As I turned to adjust the gurney's position for transport prep, I leaned in slightly. It was quiet, still, and I heard it. Clear, calm, familiar. Robert. Not loud, not a whisper, just spoken, as if from someone who had known me long enough to say it plainly. I froze. There was no one else in the room. Margaret had already stepped into the hall. I looked down. The deceased's expression hadn't changed. Lips closed, mouth relaxed, eyes sealed with closure gel and firm lids. No movement. But I had heard it. My name once, not repeated. Just once. Enough. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion, followed closely by doubt. Then training kicked in. The possibility of post-mortem air movement is real. Bodies can shift slightly as gases settle or escape, especially if there's residual air in the lungs or throat. It can cause faint sounds, like a soft exhale, or even a subtle moan if the glottis isn't fully relaxed. That's rare, but it's documented. I've witnessed it before. But that wasn't this. This wasn't air. This wasn't the accidental movement of tissue. This was a word. My name. I stepped back, checked the room, checked the hallway. No speakers, no radios. My phone was on silent in my pocket. I looked again at him, still peaceful, as I had left him. I've thought about that moment more than I care to admit. Rationally, I can't explain it, and I don't try to anymore. Some people ask if this job makes you numb. It doesn't. It teaches you respect for silence, for grief, for mystery. Later that day, I sat in the break room finishing my log sheet. One of our apprentices, a newer kid named Tom, asked if anything odd ever happened in the prep room. I said yes and no, and that either way, you show up, do it right, and let the family have their moment. But deep down, I was still turning that moment over in my mind. I know what I heard, and I know this work is filled with things we can't always explain. But what matters most isn't whether it makes sense. It's whether we carry it with dignity. John was cremated that Friday. His wife sent a handwritten card a week later. Said he'd always liked the name Robert. Said her husband was a quiet man but always remembered names. I folded the card and tucked it into my drawer with the others, and I moved on. But I'll never forget how he said it. Not with fear, not with urgency, just with the kind of calm that makes you feel known, even at the end. It was a damp Wednesday in March when I found myself alone in the prep room, the air thick with disinfectant and the faint chill of refrigeration. I'm Ellen, a funeral director with 18 years in this trade, long enough to know the rhythms of death and the quiet it demands. That day, a last-minute intake had kept me late. The deceased was Harold T., a man in his late 50s, felled by a heart attack while tending his garden. His sister, Ruth, had requested a private viewing before cremation. No embalming, just a simple prep. The prep room was my domain. Stainless steel tables, overhead lights casting stark beams, and the steady hum of the cooling unit. I'd washed Harold's body, dressed him in the flannel shirt and jeans Ruth had dropped off. And now I was finishing the details, combing his thinning gray hair, setting his mouth with a gentle curve, folding his hands across his chest. It was rote work, the kind that lets your mind drift. Around 8:30 p.m., the silence deepened, broken only by the drip of a faucet I'd meant to fix. I was adjusting Harold's collar when I felt it, a sudden drop in the air, not cold exactly, but heavy, like the room had exhaled. I paused, glancing around. The door was shut, the window sealed tight against the drizzle outside. Nothing had changed, yet the space felt crowded. Then I heard it. A rustling, faint at first, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It came from Harold's direction, though his body lay still, hands unmoving, eyes closed with gel caps I'd placed myself. I stepped closer, listening. The sound grew sharper, crisp, deliberate, as if something were brushing against fabric. I checked his shirt, thinking a tag or seam might have shifted, but it was smooth, undisturbed. My pulse quickened, but I've learned to trust logic over instinct in this job. Bodies settle, joints creak, air escapes. I told myself it was nothing more than that. I resumed my work, brushing a stray hair from Harold's forehead, when the rustling returned, louder, insistent. This time, it wasn't vague. It was the sound of flannel rubbing against itself, like someone adjusting their sleeves. I froze, staring at his arms. They hadn't moved. His fingers remained laced, his posture unchanged. I stepped back, scanning the room. The lights buzzed faintly, but no drafts stirred the air. My phone sat silent on the counter, the radio off. The rustling stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving me with the drip of that damn faucet and my own uneven breathing. I shook it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. Finishing Harold's prep, I wheeled him into the viewing room, a small, softly lit space with beige walls and a single chair for Ruth's visit. I arranged a blanket over his legs, per her request, and left to tidy up. By 9:15, I locked the prep room and headed home, the rustling still nagging at me like an itch I couldn't reach. The next morning, Ruth arrived at 10 a.m., her face etched with quiet grief. I led her to the viewing room, where Harold rested in the rental casket. She approached slowly, her hands clasped tight, and stood over him for a long moment. "He looks like himself," she murmured, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you." I nodded, stepping back to give her space. She reached out, smoothing the blanket, then paused. "He always fidgeted with his sleeves," she said, almost to herself. "Couldn't sit still, even when he was resting. Used to drive me crazy, that rustling sound." My stomach dropped. I forced a smile, my throat dry. "He's at peace now," I managed, though the words felt hollow. Ruth nodded, brushing her fingers over his arm before turning away. After she left, I stood alone in the viewing room, staring at Harold's still form. The blanket lay flat, the flannel shirt neat, yet her words echoed. That rustling sound. I've handled thousands of bodies. Car accidents, overdoses, quiet passings like Harold's. You learn to expect the unexpected. A sigh from a chest, a twitch of muscle. But this was different. It wasn't mechanics or science. It was him, or something of him, lingering in that flannel, restless even in death. I didn't log it. What would I write? Deceased adjusted his sleeves post-mortem? Instead, I carried it silently, adding it to the catalog of moments this job has handed me. Shadows that shouldn't move, voices with no source. We don't talk about them much, not out of fear, but because they're ours to bear, part of the pact we make with the dead. Harold was cremated that afternoon. Ruth picked up his urn the next day, thanking me again in her soft, steady way. I watched her go, then returned to the prep room, the faucet still dripping. As I tightened it at last, I caught myself listening, for rustling, for anything. The silence held, but I knew better than to trust it completely. In this line of work, some things don't leave when they should. They stay, brushing against the edges of what we're willing to believe, waiting for us to notice.